The rain fell softly over London, yet the city trembled under the distant roar of bombs. Smoke curled from chimneys. Streets were silent except for the echo of hurried footsteps. And yet, amid the chaos, a single figure moved with unwavering purpose. Winston Churchill. A man whose voice would soon rise above the clamor of fear, whose words would inspire a nation to stand tall in the face of darkness. Born into privilege, but touched by solitude, Churchill's life was never destined to be ordinary. From the quiet halls of Blenheim Palace to the tumultuous chambers of Parliament, he carried within him a restless spirit, a mind that questioned, observed, and dreamed. Even as shadows of doubt surrounded him, even when the world seemed to ignore his warnings, his resolve never wavered. "If you're going through hell, keep going," he once said. And so he did. Through wars, through loss, through moments when the very air seemed heavy with despair, Churchill pressed forward. He was more than a politician. He was a storyteller of courage, a painter of resilience, a leader who understood that true bravery is not the absence of fear, but the determination to act in spite of it. Tonight, we will journey through the life of this extraordinary man, not only tracing his victories and trials, but stepping into the quiet chambers of his mind, feeling the weight of every decision, every doubt, and every triumph. Before we begin, if you love stories that bring history to life, stories that explore the hearts and minds of the world's most fascinating leaders, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our journeys into the lives of those who shaped the world. Chapter 1. The Lonely Boy at Blenheim Palace. Long before the thunder of war drums and the glare of public scrutiny, there was a boy wandering the stately halls of Blenheim Palace. Born into one of Britain's most distinguished families on November 30th, 1874, Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill's life seemed, at first glance, draped in privilege. The grandeur of the palace, the gardens that stretched like emerald oceans, and the weight of a storied family name might have promised comfort, even joy. Yet, beneath the gilded surfaces and historical glory, a profound loneliness took root. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a brilliant but often absent and demanding man. His mother, Jenny Jerome, an American socialite whose world revolved around London society, offered charm and wit, but little maternal warmth. Young Winston, observant and reflective, quickly learned that attention and affection were scarce commodities. He was a child who yearned for connection, yet discovered early that to be noticed, he would have to stand apart, to carve a presence through sheer intellect and sheer will. Schooling brought no relief. At Harrow, his struggles with formal education seemed to echo a recurring truth. The boy who would one day command nations did not always conform easily to rules or expectations. He was often misunderstood, occasionally ridiculed. Yet within these challenges, a seed of resilience began to grow. He read voraciously, escaping into the worlds of history, philosophy, and adventure, finding companions in long-dead generals, explorers, and poets who whispered lessons of courage and perseverance across the pages of books.
Even in these early years, the duality of Churchill's mind became evident. On one hand, a restless imagination fueled creativity, strategic thinking, and ambition. On the other, an acute awareness of inadequacy and rejection sharpened a need to prove himself. It was a delicate balance. The loneliness that might have broken a lesser soul became the forge that tempered his character.
He began to understand a subtle truth that would guide him throughout life. Adversity, though painful, was also a teacher. The boy who had felt invisible among the corridors of power and privilege would learn to listen, to observe, and to reflect. He would discover that leadership required more than talent or lineage. It demanded empathy, patience, and an intimate understanding of human frailty. Amid the quiet evenings at Blenheim, he would often wander the gardens alone, gazing at the horizon, imagining the vastness of the world beyond his gilded cage. In those solitary walks, he wrestled with questions of identity, courage, and destiny. He knew, even if only instinctively, that a life of significance would not come easily. Solitary trees, if they grow at all, grow strong, he would later recall, words that seemed written for the boy who learned to thrive in solitude, to embrace his differences, and to cultivate the inner strength that would carry him through storms, literal and metaphorical. By the time he left the familiar stones of Blenheim behind, Winston Churchill had already begun to forge the foundation of a mind that would later guide a nation through its darkest hours. The loneliness that marked his early years had not hardened him into cynicism. Instead, it had nurtured a resilience that was both psychological and spiritual, preparing him for the weight of history yet to come. In the quiet reflection of the boy's solitude, one can already see the threads of a man who would speak to millions, who would lift spirits when despair threatened to overwhelm, and who would remind the world that courage is not born from comfort, but from confronting the unknown with an unyielding heart. The lonely boy at Blenheim Palace was, in essence, the first whisper of the great orator, the steadfast leader, the indomitable spirit we would one day call Winston Churchill. Chapter 2: The Soldier and the Dreamer. When Winston Churchill first put on the uniform of a young cavalry officer, he was not merely stepping into duty, he was stepping into destiny. The restless boy from Blenheim Palace had grown into a man of fierce ambition, eager not only to serve, but to see the world, to test himself, to feel the pulse of history beating beneath his feet. He once wrote, "Nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result." It was a statement only Churchill could make. Part courage, part curiosity, and part defiance of fate. For him, danger was not something to avoid, but something to understand. It was as though he needed to place himself on the edge of mortality to truly feel alive. In the deserts of Sudan, under the searing sun, he rode with the 21st Lancers at the Battle of Omdurman. The scene was chaos, dust, sweat, screams, and the deafening sound of steel clashing. Yet, even there, amid the storm, Churchill's mind was calm. He was not just fighting, he was observing. He noted the way fear and valor intertwined, how men's faces changed in the presence of death. That dual awareness, the soldier's courage and the writer's perception, would become his greatest gift. But it was in South Africa, during the Boer War, that the legend of Winston Churchill truly began to take shape. Captured as a war correspondent, he faced what might have been the end of his story before it had truly begun. Yet in the dead of night, driven by the same unrelenting spirit that had carried him through lonely childhood corridors, Churchill escaped. Over fences, through darkness, across miles of hostile territory, he ran. Not merely for freedom, but for validation. His daring flight turned him into a national hero. What the public saw was bravery. What Churchill felt was necessity. For him, each act of courage was a conversation with himself, a test of whether he could overcome the self-doubt that had shadowed him since youth. In letters and diaries, he revealed glimpses of this inner dialogue, the push and pull between ego and fear, pride and insecurity. The young soldier was not reckless. He was searching for meaning, for identity, for the place where his courage could serve a purpose greater than survival. In his travels through India, Egypt, and Africa, he absorbed the texture of empire, the vastness, the contradictions, the humanity of it all. He wrote with striking empathy about soldiers and civilians alike, understanding that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. He would later say, "Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen." These early adventures shaped his philosophy of leadership. That bravery was not only found on the battlefield, but also in the quiet persistence of thought and the humility to change one's mind. His time as a soldier taught him to respect both strength and restraint, to value the heart as much as the sword. And yet, beneath the triumphs, the old loneliness still lingered. In letters to his mother, he often wrote of longing for recognition, for purpose, for a destiny he could sense, but not yet define. He was a man in motion, propelled by ambition, yet haunted by uncertainty. He painted the world in grand strokes, but carried within him a subtle melancholy, the shadow of the dreamer that never truly left the boy of Blenheim Palace. As he stood watching the African horizon burn gold at sunset, Churchill understood that he was not destined to remain merely a soldier. The battlefield had given him experience, but the real war, the one between vision and doubt, was still to come. He had seen the cost of leadership in men's eyes, in blood on the sand, in the silence that follows victory. The soldier had learned to fight. The dreamer, however, had learned to feel. And it was that combination, the fire of courage and the depth of reflection, that would one day allow Winston Churchill to stand before a trembling nation and say with unshakable calm, "We shall never surrender." Chapter 3. Entering the Arena of Politics. London, 1900. The fog curled around Westminster like a ghost of old empires. The young soldier had returned home, not with medals of gold, but with stories that shimmered with courage, wit, and a sense of destiny. Winston Churchill, at just 25, had already faced war, captivity, and fame. Now he sought a new battlefield, one without rifles or uniforms, but with words sharp enough to cut through silence. He entered politics not as a follower, but as a force of nature. The House of Commons became his arena, and debate his duel. He spoke with a rhythm that was neither rehearsed nor accidental. His words carried conviction, humor, and challenge in equal measure. To some, he was brilliant, to others, unbearable. He was, as ever, a contradiction, bold and brash, yet deeply introspective.
Churchill's early years in Parliament were a dance between idealism and ambition. He crossed party lines, defying his own family's Tory tradition to join the Liberals. To his critics, this was betrayal. To Churchill, it was conviction. He believed loyalty to principles mattered more than loyalty to parties. "Some men change their party for the sake of their principles," he once said. "Others change their principles for the sake of their party." Inside him, there was always this tension: the desire to belong and the need to stand alone. Politics offered both, admiration and isolation, triumph and ridicule. Each speech was a performance and a confession, revealing not just policy, but policy. Behind his fierce energy was still that same boy from Blenheim, striving to be seen, to prove that his voice, his mind, could shape the world around him.
He rose quickly through the ranks. Undersecretary for the Colonies, President of the Board of Trade, Home Secretary. He was confident, curious, and endlessly talkative. But his confidence often teetered on the edge of arrogance. His colleagues admired his intellect, but distrusted his unpredictability. Some whispered that he loved power too much. Others saw in him a rare integrity, a man who could not bear to stand still while the world needed change. He pushed for reforms, the minimum wage, unemployment insurance, workers' rights. He believed government had a moral duty to protect its citizens, not just rule them. Yet for all his empathy toward the common man, Churchill remained, in many ways, a man apart. The aristocrat who spoke for laborers, the soldier who loved words more than war, the dreamer trapped in the machinery of politics. As years passed, the applause and criticism blended into one indistinguishable noise. He thrived on both. Conflict was his natural state, not because he sought chaos, but because he believed truth was forged in argument. Still, the deeper he stepped into the political labyrinth, the more he began to sense the loneliness within leadership. In private moments, he doubted himself. Could courage exist without certainty? Could leadership be pure when ambition lingered like a shadow behind every decision? He began to understand the heavy paradox of power, that the louder the applause, the more distant the soul becomes. Churchill's mind, restless as ever, could not stay silent even in success. When he saw danger, he spoke. When others sought comfort, he questioned. That instinct, to challenge rather than conform, would one day save a nation. But in these early years, it made him an outsider among his peers. By the end of his first decade in politics, he had learned that words could win wars or start them.
His voice, so confident in youth, began to carry weight. He realized that to speak was not merely to persuade. It was to bear responsibility for what might follow. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal, he would later say. It is the courage to continue that counts. Those words were not born from victory, but from these restless years, years of learning, stumbling, rebuilding, and preparing for storms yet unseen. For now, Churchill stood at the threshold of history, half hero, half heretic. He had entered the grand arena and found that the fiercest battles were not with enemies across the aisle, but with the doubts that whispered from within. The boy had become a man, the soldier a statesman. Yet, in his heart, he knew that the greatest trials of his life were still waiting beyond the horizon. Chapter 4. The Wilderness Years. The House of Commons had grown colder. The same hall that once echoed with Winston Churchill's fiery words now hummed with indifference. The applause had faded. The attention shifted elsewhere. The tides of politics, once his companion, had turned against him. It was the early 1930s, years of uncertainty, unrest, and denial. While Europe stumbled through the smoke of broken treaties and hollow promises, Churchill found himself exiled, not by law, but by silence. No longer part of government, no longer trusted by his peers, he stood on the outskirts of power, watching the storm gather over the continent. But it was not in Churchill's nature to be still. He read obsessively, wrote relentlessly, and spoke whenever anyone would listen. His home at Chartwell became his fortress of solitude. The red brick house, surrounded by rolling English hills, offered both peace and torment. There he painted, landscapes full of light, skies filled with calm. And yet his writings were filled with warnings. The clouds are gathering over Europe, he said, again and again, like a prophet whose words no one wanted to believe. In Parliament, his warnings about Hitler were dismissed as paranoia. Winston is living in the past, they whispered. He sees enemies where there are none. But Churchill's mind, sharpened by history, sensed danger before others could feel its shadow. He had studied tyrants. He knew how ambition feeds on weakness, how freedom fades when fear is ignored. These were the wilderness years, when his influence waned, his reputation dimmed, and his voice seemed lost in the roar of appeasement. Yet, in that darkness, something inside him began to crystallize. The conviction that truth is not measured by applause, but by endurance. Each morning, he would walk through his garden at Chartwell, cigar in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. He watched his fish ponds, fed his swans, and yet behind his calm gestures lived a mind at war. He knew that history has a way of testing the patient and punishing the proud. He once wrote, "Kites rise highest against the wind, not with it." It was as if he were speaking to himself, reminding his soul that resistance, not comfort, gives life its purpose. And so he resisted. He wrote Marlborough, His Life and Times, a monumental biography of his ancestor, not just to tell a story, but to keep his mind sharp, to study leadership, to understand how one man's vision could outlast an empire. There were moments of despair, too.
Late at night, the study lamp flickered over his desk, illuminating piles of notes, maps, and drafts. Outside, the English countryside slept. Inside, the exiled statesman fought invisible battles with history. "Have I outlived my usefulness?" he once muttered to a friend. It was a rare admission of doubt from a man who had always stood tall. But fate has a strange sense of timing. The world that ignored him was about to need him again. Across the channel, Hitler's voice was growing louder. Armies were marching, treaties were breaking, and the dream of peace was crumbling. Slowly, reluctantly, Britain began to realize that the man they had called an alarmist was in truth a visionary. When the Munich Agreement was signed in 1938, an act of appeasement Churchill had warned against, he stood in Parliament and declared, "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." The chamber fell silent. His words were not angry, they were heavy with sorrow. He had seen it all coming, and it broke his heart to be right. In these years of exile, Churchill found something deeper than power: resilience. He learned to live without validation, to trust his instincts, even when the world turned its back. The loneliness that once haunted him at Blenheim now became his ally, a quiet space where clarity was born. And then, as if history itself had been waiting for him, the call came. The year was 1939. War had begun. Britain once again needed a voice to rally its people. A voice unshaken by popularity, unbroken by failure. The same Parliament that had cast him aside now looked to him for strength. When he returned to power, older and wiser, he did not gloat. He did not say, "I told you so." Instead, he stood before his people and simply said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." It was not triumph that spoke. It was truth. The wilderness had done its work. It had stripped away vanity, polished conviction, and forged within him the iron will that would one day face down tyranny itself. Chapter 5. The Darkest Hour. May 10th, 1940. The sky above London hung grey and uncertain, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The world was on fire. Hitler's armies stormed through Europe, France was collapsing, and Britain stood alone, trembling on the edge of defeat. That morning, King George VI summoned Winston Churchill to Buckingham Palace, the moment he had long prepared for. The moment destiny had withheld and then suddenly demanded had arrived. He was appointed Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. As he left the palace, Churchill later recalled, "I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial. Yet even destiny, noble as it sounds, is never gentle." When he stepped into 10 Downing Street, the air was thick with tension. Britain's leaders were divided, Parliament uncertain, the people weary. The war had already claimed too many lives, and the shadow of Nazi Germany loomed closer with every day. The pressure was unrelenting, both from the enemy abroad and the doubts within his own government. Every night, as sirens wailed over London, Churchill would stand on the roof of his residence, watching the city burn. The sky glowed orange with fire, and the air was filled with the sound of crumbling stone and distant screams. Yet he stood there, hat tilted, cigar glowing in the darkness, silent, unflinching, utterly human.
He knew that leadership, in times like these, was not about grandeur, but endurance. It was about holding steady when the world fell apart. He told his cabinet, "You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be."
Those words were not spoken from pride, but from necessity. He was speaking not only to his ministers, but to himself, to silence the doubt that gnawed at his soul. Every decision he made carried the weight of millions. Each failure could mean the death of a nation.
In private, he was not invincible. His staff recalled moments when he would sit quietly in his chair, eyes closed, the world's burden pressing down. At times he fell into deep melancholy, what he called his black dog. Yet even in those moments of despair, his will remained unbroken. "I am an optimist," he would say. "It does not seem much use being anything else." He knew the power of words. His speeches became weapons stronger than steel, crafted not only to inform, but to inspire. "We shall fight on the beaches," he declared to Parliament, his voice trembling with fire. "We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender." When that speech was broadcast to the public, something miraculous happened. The people of Britain, housewives, dock workers, children huddled in shelters, felt the spark of belief. The same man who had once been dismissed as a relic of the past had become the very heartbeat of resistance. And yet, behind that voice of defiance was still a man, aging, weary, uncertain. In the solitude of late nights, he would visit the underground war rooms, moving slowly between maps, lit by flickering lamps, tracing enemy movements with his finger. His generals spoke of strategies, but Churchill's gaze was fixed not on lines or borders. It was on the faces of his people. Every morning, reports arrived. Cities bombed, ships sunk, soldiers lost. Yet each time he addressed the nation, his voice carried the rhythm of calm courage. He never promised safety, only struggle. Never illusions, only truth. If the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, he said, men will still say this was their finest hour. Still, doubt never left him completely. One night, after a particularly brutal air raid, he wrote in his diary, "I sometimes wonder whether any of us will survive this ordeal. Yet I cannot believe that Providence has sent us into this world to be tormented by such evil, without purpose." What kept him standing was not confidence, but conviction. The belief that light, however dim, could still be found in the darkness. The war was not only fought in trenches and skies, but inside the hearts of those who refused to give up. When the bombs finally ceased for the night, Churchill would walk through the rubble-strewn streets, speaking quietly to the people.
They called him the Old Lion. And, indeed, he moved with that kind of dignity. Scarred, tired, but proud. Children waved from doorways. Women smiled through tears. He returned their greetings, tipping his hat, his eyes heavy with both sorrow and love. Those moments reminded him of why he fought. Not for empire, not for power, but for ordinary souls who refused to bow. The darkest hour was not only about war, it was about faith. Faith in resilience, in humanity, in the quiet courage that keeps a candle burning, even as the wind howls. By the time dawn rose over the battered city, Churchill would retreat once more to his study, pour himself a small glass of brandy, and whisper to the empty room, "We shall go on to the end." And so he did. Against fear, against doubt, against the night itself. Chapter 6. The Voice of Defiance. The year was 1941. The air in London still smelled of smoke and iron, yet the people had learned to live beneath the bombs. The Blitz had turned nights into nightmares, and still the city endured. Beneath the trembling skies, in dimly lit shelters and ruined streets, the voice that kept them standing was not that of a soldier or a king. It was the voice of Winston Churchill. He spoke not from comfort, but from conviction. His words rolled through radios and echoed in hearts like the tolling of a bell. He didn't promise victory soon, nor peace tomorrow. He promised endurance. Never give in. Never, 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 he told the people, except to convictions of honor and good sense. Those speeches were not mere performances. They were lifelines. Each sentence was a rope thrown into the darkness, pulling the nation closer to hope. Churchill had discovered that his greatest weapon was not his intellect or strategy, but his voice. His gravelly, deliberate tone carried the rhythm of courage, and his pauses, those long, heavy silences, reminded listeners that he too was human. He had a rare gift to make struggle sound sacred. He never hid the pain or the danger. He spoke of blood, toil, tears, and sweat, because he knew that truth, however brutal, binds people together. He refused to shield his nation from fear. Instead, he taught them how to look it in the eye. When he appeared on radio broadcasts, the world seemed to stop. Housewives paused over their kettles. Soldiers stood still in barracks. Children leaned closer to the wireless. His words became the nation's heartbeat. Even across the Atlantic, his speeches reached American ears, stirring admiration and awakening old friendships. Churchill understood that sound could shape destiny. "Words are the only things that last forever," he once wrote. He treated every speech as a weapon, every phrase as a shield. Late at night, he would rewrite lines by candlelight, pacing the floor in his dressing gown, dictating to secretaries until dawn. Each word mattered. Each had to strike like a drum in the fog. But what the world heard as strength often came from struggle. Beneath the public defiance, Churchill wrestled with exhaustion, grief, and the quiet terror of failure. His friends noticed the fatigue in his eyes,
the tremor in his hands. The black dog still followed him, whispering doubt even as his voice lifted nations. Yet perhaps that was why people believed him, because he spoke as one of them. He did not stand above the storm. He stood inside it. When London was bombed, he walked its ruins. When homes were shattered, he visited them. His presence said more than any speech could. That leadership was not distance, but closeness. In those years, Churchill became more than a prime minister. He became a symbol. His speeches were symphonies of defiance, blending pain, humor, and hope into one sound. "Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties," he declared, "and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, 'This was their finest hour.'" Even his enemies feared his words. Nazi propagandists called him the British Bulldog, mocking his stubbornness. But Churchill embraced the name. "I like pigs," he once quipped. "Dogs look up to us. Cats look down on us. Pigs treat us as equals." Behind the humor was defiance, the refusal to be diminished, no matter the insult or the odds. By 1942, the world began to shift. The United States had entered the war. The tide was turning, slowly, painfully, toward hope. Yet Churchill's task was far from over. The voice that had inspired survival now had to inspire victory. And he knew victory would not come through force alone. It would come through faith, the kind that lives in words long before it lives in deeds. One night, as he prepared for another broadcast, a young technician asked him how he kept finding the strength to speak. Churchill smiled wearily, then said, "Because if I stop speaking, they might stop believing." And that was his truth. He spoke not because it was easy, but because silence would be surrender. So, through smoke and sorrow, through loneliness and doubt, Winston Churchill kept talking. His voice, hoarse yet unbroken, echoed through the world, like a promise whispered into the wind. That courage is not the absence of fear. It is the will to keep going, one word at a time. Chapter 7. Victory and the Weight of Glory. The war that had consumed the world for 6 long years was finally drawing to its end. The skies over London were no longer filled with sirens, but with the echo of cheers. Flags fluttered, church bells rang, and strangers embraced in the streets. On May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, Britain exhaled the breath it had been holding since the first bomb fell. And at the heart of it all stood Winston Churchill, the man whose voice had carried a nation through its darkest nights. He walked onto the balcony of the Ministry of Health to face the sea of faces below. Hundreds of thousands gathered to see the leader who had never surrendered. When he raised his hand in the V sign of victory, the crowd erupted. For a moment, the entire island seemed to tremble, not from fear, but from joy. Yet within that roar of celebration, Churchill felt something deeper, a silence only he could hear. Victory was sweet, yes, but it was also heavy. The weight of every decision, every lost life, pressed upon him like a crown of thorns. He had led them to triumph, but triumph always carries ghosts. He had dreamed of this day, yet it was not as he imagined. The Europe he once knew was scarred, its cities hollow, its people forever changed. Britain was victorious, but weary. The empire was fading, the treasury drained, the people hungry for peace and change. Churchill, the wartime lion, suddenly felt out of step with the new rhythm of the world. In private moments, he confessed to friends that victory brought not relief, but restlessness. The man who had lived for the battle now faced the quiet, a silence he could not command. The war had given him purpose. Peace demanded reflection. "I am ready to meet my Maker," he once said, half in jest. "But whether my Maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me is another matter." He had fought not only for Britain, but for civilization itself. Yet, even heroes are not immune to time. Only months after the war's end, in the general election of 1945, the people voted him out of office. The world that had needed his defiance now longed for gentleness, for rebuilding, for new voices. When the results were announced, Churchill accepted them with grace. "They have a perfect right to kick me out," he said quietly, "but they have no right to expect me to like it." Then, with characteristic wit, he lit a cigar and went back to painting. The old lion was wounded, but not broken. Still, the solitude that followed victory was different from the wilderness of his youth. This time, it was filled not with frustration, but reflection. He had faced the abyss and returned. He had led millions through fear and flame, and though he would never again hold power as he once did, he had already written his place into history. When asked how he wished to be remembered, Churchill replied, "As the defender of freedom." But perhaps his truest legacy was something quieter, the reminder that words, when born of courage, can outlast even empires. As the sun set over London that evening, Churchill looked out from his window at Chartwell, watching the sky shift from gold to grey. For once the world was at peace. He sipped his whiskey, smiled faintly, and murmured to himself the words he had lived by all his life. Never give in. Never. And with that, the great voice of defiance finally fell silent, not in defeat, but in fulfillment. Chapter 8. Reflections and Shadows. The echoes of victory had long faded. The crowds that once chanted his name had gone home, their cheers replaced by the hum of rebuilding. London stood again, scarred but breathing. And somewhere in the countryside, at his beloved Chartwell, Winston Churchill sat quietly beneath the same English sky he had once sworn to defend. Age had softened his face, but not his mind. The fire that once burned for battle now flickered in quieter pursuits, writing, painting, remembering. He spent hours before his easel, brush in hand, watching color bloom across the canvas.
"When I paint," he once said, "I forget everything else. I can only see the canvas and the color." Painting for him was not escape. It was healing. The war had left its mark, not only on nations, but on him. There were nights when he still woke at the sound of phantom sirens, memories of blitz-torn London haunting his sleep. Yet he bore it all with a kind of weary grace. "We make a living by what we get," he would remind himself. "But we make a life by what we give." He gave his voice, his years, his very peace of mind. And though power had slipped from his hands, the world still looked to him, not as a politician, but as a witness to the endurance of the human spirit. When he spoke now, it was no longer to rally troops, but to reflect on time, destiny, and the fragility of greatness. Friends noticed that he often grew quiet in conversation, as if listening to something far away. The roar of Parliament, the bombs over London, the cries of victory, all had become whispers. He knew the truth that all great men eventually face, that history remembers deeds, but forgets the weight they carried. In 1953, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his mastery of historical and biographical description, and for brilliant oratory in defending exalted human values. It was a rare recognition, not of power, but of expression. Proof that his greatest battles had always been fought with words. Still, he understood that fame and legacy are but fleeting shadows. In his later years, he often gazed at the portraits hanging in Chartwell's hallways. His ancestors, his family, his younger self in uniform, and wondered how time could turn even the fiercest fire into quiet embers. "History will be kind to me," he once joked, "for I intend to write it." And he did. Yet behind that humor was a deeper longing, to be seen not as a legend, but as a man who had simply done his duty. His body began to fail him, though his spirit did not. The same determination that had once faced Hitler now wrestled with frailty and silence. Each morning he would rise slowly, open the curtains, and greet the dawn with that familiar mix of melancholy and gratitude. Visitors to Chartwell described a man both proud and peaceful, one who had carried history on his shoulders and learned, finally, to put it down. When asked if he feared death, he smiled faintly and said, "I am ready to meet my maker, but I'm not sure my maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me." In those last years, as twilight deepened, Churchill seemed content to let the world move on. He had spoken, he had fought, he had endured. Now he watched the world he helped save spin forward without him. And as the shadows lengthened across the garden, he lifted his glass one final time and murmured softly, to no one in particular, it was a grand time to be alive. Chapter 9. The Sunset Years. By the early 1960s, Winston Churchill had become a relic of another age, a man who had walked with giants and watched empires crumble. The warlord had turned into a gentle old lion, moving slower, speaking less, yet still carrying that unmistakable spark behind his eyes. At Chartwell, his sanctuary in Kent,
He spent his days surrounded by his books, his paintings, and the gentle hum of the countryside. Visitors would often find him sitting by the pond, cigar in hand, lost in thought. The battles were over, but his mind still wandered through the echoes of history. Sometimes he would mutter lines of poetry or recall moments that had changed the world. "I was not the lion," he once reflected, "but it fell to me to give the lion's roar." He painted until his hands trembled too much to hold the brush. Each canvas was a fragment of peace, a way to turn silence into color. He painted sunsets, rivers, walls bathed in golden light, perhaps trying to capture the quiet beauty of time slipping away. Though his health declined, Churchill remained surrounded by family and friends who adored him. Clementine, his lifelong companion, stood faithfully by his side, her love a calm anchor against the fading tide. "We shape our dwellings," he had once said, "and afterwards our dwellings shape us." Chartwell had shaped him too. It was the heart of his solitude, the mirror of his peace. In his final years, he spoke little of politics. The world was changing rapidly. Rockets soared, new wars brewed, and new leaders rose to power. Yet he seemed content to watch from the margins, smiling faintly at the irony of progress. To improve is to change, he had once declared. So, to be perfect is to have changed often. Now, he watched change from the stillness of his garden, his mind a map of all he had seen. On January 24th, 1965, exactly 70 years after his father's death, Winston Churchill took his final breath. The news rippled across the world like the toll of a great bell. London fell silent, flags hung low, and millions mourned not only a statesman, but a symbol. The man who had stood unbroken when darkness had seemed absolute. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of history. But some lights never fade. They burn quietly, like embers beneath the ashes, refusing to die. Winston Churchill's flame was one of them. He was far from perfect. He knew fear, despair, and loneliness. Yet in the face of ruin, he stood tall. Not because he was without doubt, but because he chose courage over comfort. "If you're going through hell," he once said, "keep going." Those words were not just a rallying cry for a nation. They were the mantra of his own life. Churchill taught us that leadership is not about grandeur. It's about endurance. About standing firm when every voice tells you to sit down. About believing in tomorrow even when the night feels endless. And perhaps that is why his story still matters, because deep down, every one of us faces battles that test the soul. And sometimes all we need is a spark to keep going. The years have passed, but the echo of his voice remains, steady, proud, and utterly human. The flame he lit during humanity's darkest hour still flickers in every act of defiance against despair, in every small choice, to hope instead of surrender. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that courage can outlast fear, then join us. Subscribe to the channel, leave a thought in the comments, and share this journey with someone who might need a little light today. Because stories like Churchill's are not just history. They are reminders that within each of us, there is a flame that never dies.